The fourth season of the Overwatch League is still a few months away, but most of the teams are pretty much done with their offseason. A lot has gone down these last few months and it's been very busy, so of course many of you have been requesting for me to bring back that final recap for every team series that I did last year, but it got me thinking, what if instead of doing it by divisions, we go through every team individually so everybody gets their own spotlight? It'll be a good way to guarantee more consistent content while we wait for the beginning of the season. It allows for me to get more creative since I don't have to rush through 4 teams a video. I'm going to bring back some content from an old series of mine during the early days of my channel, aka the How Good Is Your Team series. While highlighting all of the moves, I plan to give some brief opinions on them and tell you some of my overall thoughts on the team as a whole. Along with that, each team is going to get a letter grade based on how their offseason went in my opinion. And finally, I will give you a rough projection of where I believe they could finish in the overall standings heading into Season 4. Apologies for the lengthy explanation, I just wanted to make my intentions clear so we're all on the same page. So today we're starting off with the defending champion, San Francisco Shock. They had quite the interesting offseason. They lost a few crucial players, but also got some compelling pieces to compensate. Let's start with who they lost. So the Shock were able to maintain a majority of their championship core, but unfortunately, it becomes more and more likely that you're going to lose a few guys when your roster runs so deep. The most notable loss in most people's eyes has to be Moth. He's been their rock for 2 years and has arguably been the best main support in the league over that span. His consistency and communication have always been a very important part of what made the Shock as good as they were, so to lose him to another team through free agency is kind of brutal. But the losses don't stop there. Losing Ons to retirement is rather unfortunate. The man kind of came out of nowhere in 2020 and quickly established himself as one of the most deadliest hit-scan players in the league. His raw skill and potential were out of this world, and I have no doubt in my mind that he probably could have been even better this year if he decided to stay. Finally, the Shock said their goodbyes to Rascal. It sounds silly, but this was probably the loss they suffered from the least. It's not that Rascal is bad or anything like that, it's just that his skill set has become less valuable due to projectile characters having less relevance in the meta. It's good to have a flex DPS on hand in case things suddenly do change, and just having them in general is always good, but why overpay for somebody you might not use all that often when there are definitely cheaper replacements on the market? So honestly, not the hugest loss in the world, but still very sad nonetheless. Those are the only losses the Shock sustained player-wise, but they did also take a few hits with their coaching staff. Junkbuck and Arachne moved on to new head coaching opportunities on Houston and Guangzhou respectively. Rightfully so, I'd like to add. It sucks because they're both well-respected and capable guys, but the good news for Shock fans is that Krusty is still around, and that's the most important part. That's all the Shock lost, though. They lost a fair amount, but that's to be expected when you're dominant for this long. People are going to move on, that's just how it goes. But I mean, it really could have been a lot worse. It's not like this team has been left in complete and utter shambles, because everybody else from that Season 3 team is still around. They re-signed Super, and anybody else who might have been in danger of an expiring contract. Not to mention that they didn't just sit around and not fill up the holes. Every position they lost was replaced. Starting with main support, they had the privilege of acquiring FD God in a trade with the Paris Eternal. He might not be quite as good as Moth, but he's still a high-tier main support. He's not quite as good on Mercy. I think that's the big thing to take away hero pool-wise because there is a fairly noticeable difference. However, everything else is a bit more even. You could honestly argue that FD God had the better Brigitte last year, and I think Lucio's kind of a toss-up. FD God is definitely more of a playmaking type of Lucio, but Moth's style tends to be more well-balanced, which has worked very well for the Shock. If the Shock can build through this new type of aggressive style though, then everything should be fine. But it's something to keep in mind because it is different from what the Shock have grown accustomed to. The Shock are very fortunate that Paris were short on funds and that nobody else scooped up FD God instead. It's not every day where you can replace an S-tier support player with one that is close to his level, so good for the Shock. But anyway, let's move on to the DPS. To compensate for Ons retiring, they managed to get their hands on Glister. Again, on paper it might be a slight downgrade when it comes to a potential ceiling, but it's not something to be worried about in my opinion. Glister has a lot of untapped potential, which he never really got to show on a struggling London team. Now that he's in the hands of the Shock, he can show the world what he's truly capable of. With solid teammates and coaches backing him up, he could be just as reliable as Ons, and I see no reason why he couldn't. Glister is an elite sniper in his own right, definitely one of the best counter snipers in the game. Finally, we have Nero coming in to replace Rascal. Maybe not the number one guy that people wanted the Shock to get as a replacement, but it's honestly not that bad. Nero is not superstar level, but still above average in my opinion. Let it be known, I am doubtful that Nero could ever reach the level of Rascal at his peak. I feel that it would be very difficult for him to achieve this feat, but that does not mean Nero can't be someone the Shock can depend on here and there. People love to make fun of him as this Pharaoh one-trick, which is something I really don't believe is true. Nero certainly does get overrated. I have actually fallen victim to this myself in the past, I admit it, but he gets too much hate. He's relatively decent at all the projectile characters in the game, and he's not bad at flex DPS at all. I think people also need to realize that Nero's role could be rather limited. Think about how they utilized Rascal last year. That's probably going to be Nero now. He's not somebody who I am expecting to be heavily utilized. He's there to back up Glister and Striker for the most part, I would say. He's filling out the remaining holes. But who knows, maybe Nero gets more time than I think. Just like Glister, there's definitely reason to believe he could improve under the Shock team. Going from the Charge coaching to the Shock is a pretty noticeable difference. Here's how I see it. After what happened with Ants, I tend to think that you are very capable if the Shock are interested in you. There were options out there, but they picked up Nero over all of them. I know it may seem crazy to be that faithful, but the Shock are a very special case. Wrapping up the Shock's offseason, they rebuilt their coaching staff by promoting Kasaurus to an assistant coaching role and signing former Spitfire coach Agape as their other assistant coach. It doesn't feel as stacked as previous years, I would say, but it's not bad at all still. Agape is going to be an interesting case because he didn't impress all that much on London, but he might be a little bit better in a lesser role under somebody who knows what he's doing like Krusty. Kasaurus I'm more excited about though. In my opinion, he is a damn good coach. I loved the work that he did on Atlanta and in the World Cup for Team Netherlands. Him and Krusty should work quite well together. Okay, so that's everything that happened during the San Francisco Shock's offseason so far. It was eventful in terms of some of the people they lost and signed, but not eventful at the same time because they did a lot less than many of the other teams around the league. Generally speaking, it was an okay offseason. They lost a few big names, but also made sure to get replacements every step of the way. If we balance the two things out, I would say the Shock deserve a B as their offseason grade. It was kind of brutal with the losses and everything, but they did everything in their power to respond. They showed urgency, which is great. That's what you want to see out of a championship caliber team. However, I still can't deny the very slight downgrades. To lose Moth and Ants is rough. There was nothing they could do about Ants because he wanted to retire, but they had a chance to bring back Moth. He was a free agent and the Shock were in the running, but they lost out on him. Losing out on the best main support in the league and one of your greatest in-game leaders is going to hurt no matter what. The Shock will probably figure it out if I had to guess, but a downgrade is a downgrade. Now for my overall thoughts on the Shock and their capabilities. So as I previously mentioned, the Shock still have a solid foundation. Championship caliber if you ask me. Some of the faces may have changed, but the core is still there. They still have arguably the best tank line in the league. They still have two of the top flex supports in the world. They lost Moth, but managed to get a top 4 main support from Season 3. And they have a very versatile DPS rotation. They're arguably the clear-cut top team in North America still. Despite the losses, they're still the Shock. The only concerns I have are minor ones, really. One is how they'll adjust to a new starting main support. Like I said before, this team is used to Moth. FD God is not Moth in more ways than one. The primary things I'm concerned with are how the Shock adapt to his different playstyle and how good of a communicator and in-game leader he's going to be compared to Moth. Knowing the Shock, this stuff probably won't be a problem. Plus, FD God is a really good player, so he should be able to adjust. The fact that he already has experience working with like 5 other Koreans in the lineup at one time is a really great advantage and a great starting point for him. My other concern is that their DPS line may be slightly weaker compared to Season 3. Again, I'm kind of just nitpicking here, but it's hard to really replicate the production of Ants and Rascal. The Shock no longer have the strongest DPS line on paper. It's still very good, but you could argue a few teams have slightly more firepower under their belts. The Shock should be fine still, like I've been saying, but I thought I'd bring it up because it means they might not be able to assert dominance at this position as much as they used to. That's about it though. Besides that, I pretty much don't have any worries about the Shock, and I see no reason why I should be worried until they give me a solid reason to. As a result, I see the Shock finishing anywhere from 1st through 3rd place in the overall standings. They have what it takes to outplay every other team in North America. The competition has gotten greater, this is a fact, and there's a chance they could lose more often because of this, but I'm expecting them to win a majority of their games still. Their experience and confidence are at a level very few are capable of matching. Given how strong and well-rounded their team is from top to bottom, these guys are absolutely title contenders once again. Most of the players they held onto are insane, and some of the new faces cases have incredible potential. If the Shock do not win a lot of games and if they fail to make another deep playoff run, I would be pretty surprised. They're built for pretty much any situation, and I'm expecting that to reflect upon their performance as we head into Season 4. And there you go. That's going to do it for the San Francisco Shock offseason recap. How are you feeling about the Shock after their offseason? Let me know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed the first episode of this series and you want to see more, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And as always, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.